So this happened about a year ago. I was on the ranch with one of my friends. Our parents were out as they were shopping for a month's worth of groceries and a new bull, so they were gone for 2 days. My friend and I had a few beers and we were discussing hunting stories. It was about 1 a.m. when we heard what sounded like someone trying to break into the house. We looked through the window and it was a deer, so we each grabbed a gun. I took the 300 and he took the 270. I opened the door and was getting ready for a shot when the deer opened its mouth and had teeth of what looked like a carnivore. Halfway pissing my pants, I took a step back and my friend shut the door. I asked, "Did you see that?" He nods in shock. I opened the window and fire. Bam! Half its face was missing, but it just stood there staring at me. I load another one and shoot again, this time in the neck, and the deer starts to walk away. Any hunter knows that a 300 Win Mag is no joke, so that the fact that it was walking was what scared me. We slept that night with the guns in our rooms. The next morning we decided to track it because my dad would have given me shit for wasting an animal like that. But we're still having the guns, so we followed the tracks and it's normal for about half a mile. Then the blood stops, but there are still tracks. We walk for another mile, then we're no longer 4 hooves in the dirt, but only 2, as if it started to walk on 2 legs. My friend and I are shitting bricks, but we keep on following it. Eventually it leads to a cave where the opening is so big that only a small child can fit in there. Inside we see 2 glowing eyes. At the point we looked at each other and we booked it back to the ranch. We didn't tell our parents, and when they asked about the 2 empty bullet casings, we said we shot at a deer but missed. To this day I still wonder if we actually saw what we saw.
During the midsummer, usually around the middle of July, me and a couple of my good friends, Kevin, Ryan, and Tommy, all the way through my childhood always made time to go up to Kevin's family cabin, way up north in the forest of Minnesota, located at Vermilion Lake. Throughout all of our young years, we would always go, for sure accompanied by my friend's dad, Kevin's dad who owned the cabin, and sometimes a few of our dads as well. Once we were juniors in high school, we felt mature and old enough to go to the cabin on our own finally, without Kevin's dad or any other adult supervision that may have accompanied us. I would like to mention a little information in regards to my friend's cabin to help you picture the scenario. My friend's cabin is very remote and very little based upon a very large-sized island. Other cabins were on the island, but the next one closest to us was a solid quarter or half mile away at least, which you could get to by taking a man-made path around the island. I want to also mention that to get to my friend's cabin, you had to park on a gravel road on the opposite side of the island, as his cabin was on the island, and take his boat across the lake about a half mile to reach the cabin. The lake is huge. My mind always had a tendency to run around when sleeping there at night throughout all my years, for it was all one level with only 2 bedrooms next to one another, a kitchen/living room connected, and a bathroom in the back of the cabin. And where you slept in the cabin, there was always at least 1 window in each room with no curtain at all, so it was very easy to see outside. This is where my mind would run, as I always thought someone was peering in. Of course, nobody ever was. I had been to this cabin a dozen times throughout my lifespan, and nothing bad ever happened, and the older I got, the easier it was to sleep. Now for the event. We usually would stay a week's worth or 4 to 5 nights. On the 3rd night during the trip, when we were there on our own finally, we had set up a campfire and had begun drinking beer all night. I don't condone underage drinking, by the way, we just had happened to sneak some. We went up to his dock to gaze up at the magnificent stars and enjoy our buzz when all of a sudden, we heard something out of the water that sounded like a fish jumping out to catch a bug. We quickly looked out at the lake with curiosity, wondering where the splash came, having our poles ready 24/7. Thankfully the moon was out that night, which helped lit up the lake. Otherwise, it would be dark as black with there being no city lights for miles upon miles, and we would not have been able to see anything on the lake. My friend Ryan began to point out, saying, what the hell is that? After looking closely and finally spotting what he was pointing at, all I can describe is it simply looked like a head out in the middle of the lake, just floating about, staring at us directly. It was about 3/4 worth of a football field length out in the lake from the dock. There is no question that I could see its features. It had long black hair and a very palish skin like a face, but couldn't make out the eyes, mouth, nose, or chin, as it was just a blob of pale skin with long black hair over it. I'll never forget the feeling that came over me. The hairs on my legs, neck, and arm all stood up, and I was paralyzed on the inside, ready to leave that moment. We told ourselves it was just a loon, as these birds are very popular night drifters on the lake and do their hunting late, and also have black with white colors on their coats, and hunt by diving deep into the water, holding their breath up to 10 minutes sometimes. So it was possible that a loon all of a sudden popped up in the water after hunting a bit, or at least we tried to talk ourselves into that scenario. All of us having the creeps and noticing it wasn't moving one bit, just treading water in its same place, went back to our campfire, lit it even brighter, and headed inside to drink more. I would like to mention that there was a staircase outside my friend's cabin, about 8 stairs in length, down to the bottom where the fire pit was in dock. We soon forgot about the head with the help of the beer until I had to use the bathroom really bad, but the one inside was preoccupied. I just went outside to do my business since we were in the great outdoors. When I had been taking a pee and glancing out at the beautiful moonlit lake, I noticed that that black circle object was still there about 30 yards closer now, still looking as if it was staring right at me. I could easily see the nose on this thing's face. Again, it was very pale, like it hadn't seen the sun for years. A very, very uneasy feeling came over me, and I immediately went inside and told my other friends to come look quick, keeping my eyes glued to it at the door of the cabin. We came outside to see it still there looking at us, as if this head was corked up at us with its chin on the air. Nobody dared to go down to the dock anymore, and we immediately went back inside, ruling out that it probably wasn't a loon because a loon wouldn't tread water in the same spot. Eventually the current would have drifted it somewhere else in a rocking manner. For a loon to stay in the same spot for almost an hour or two made no sense to any of us. This head-like object was stiff as a board, not moving a single muscle, just staring up at us from the deck instead. There was no ripple effect at all in the lake from the object. We said it was just a log and went back in. I could tell everyone else felt uneasy too. A few hours would pass. It was super late into the night at this point and knew we needed sleep. Being my curious self, I looked back outside once more, and the black object had completely vanished. I could help but feel a sense of relief, thinking the log must have floated off or just hit shore somewhere. As we slept with the windows open that night, there was no AC in the cabin. We had to open them or we would fry this cabin, with it being the middle of summer. Me and my buddy Tommy slept in the living room while my 2 other friends slept in the 2 separate bedrooms with their doors open. Not being able to sleep but keeping my eyes peeled shut, I began to hear someone walking around at the bottom of the stairs to the cabin, around the campfire and at the bottom of the stairs. I thought I was about to shit bricks, no question what or whoever I heard down there was of the dock now, pacing back and forth as it made sound of a boot clicking on the wood. It was as if they weren't sure what to do with themselves. It lasted for about 3 minutes. Wanting to whisper to my buddy but frozen in fear, I just kept my eyes shut and ears on full alert. The footsteps sounded like they took 2 steps up the deck stairs all of a sudden, then turned around and it sounded like they were sprinting out down the man-made path. After it sounded like the steps were long gone and a couple minutes had passed, I woke up Tommy asking if he heard the steps. Both of us sitting up, I was startled to find my friend Ryan walking out of his room and saying we need to leave. A minute after the steps vanished. Something was very disturbing about his expression. I asked him why. He woke up my other friend Kevin in the living room and said, "Let's go, get to the boat, it's time to go." Asking him what, Ryan, what the hell was wrong with you? He explained to us quickly while he was grabbing his stuff, and I will never forget what he explained, as will my other friends. He said when he was turning sides on his bed to get more comfortable, he saw someone peeking in at the top right corner of the window, and it quickly shifted out of his view. He said all he saw was one eye, ghostly white skin, and black hair long down the window. Another thing I would like to add, when we look back at what he experienced, it chills us to the bone, realizing that since this face was in the top right corner of the window in my friend's room that he was sleeping in, this thing was either damn near 8 feet tall, standing on something like bricks trying to peek in, or was floating. Ryan then continued to say, "Let's fucking go," very seriously. absolutely disturbed the fuck out of my mind and feeling like I was going to be sick, and then telling them what my friend and I heard in the living room. We all agreed and packed our stuff and booked it, not cleaning the cabin or anything. We locked up, and as we headed down the stairs, we saw bare footprints in the dirt heading off into the path and all around the cabin. We picked up our step getting to the boat, not knowing what was watching us or around us. Threw our stuff in the boat, untied it, and sped off. I didn't even think about the head in the water anymore or to look in the water. My eyes were just glued to the island trying to spot anything moving, but I saw nothing. When we had finally gotten our stuff back in the car and boat tied up, we hopped in the car and took off. We had been driving out about 10 minutes, and out of the blue, Ryan all of a sudden broke down the car sobbing, saying, "What was it, guys? Oh, what the fuck did I see?" He called to tell our parents what had happened on the way back and that Ryan was freaking out, and they told us to just get home safely and quickly. It was late, about 4 or 5 in the morning, but no one slept, and it was a very quiet ride home. My friend's dad, who owns the cabin, went up the following weekend and said he experienced nothing while there. But he did mention bare footprints were still lingering about, which he thought odd because someone was walking around on his property. Whatever Ryan saw in the window hit him really hard. After his breakdown, he had trouble sleeping multiple nights and ended up having to seek some help for a couple weeks and hop on sleeping medicine. As time went, he ended up being fine, but isn't comfortable sleeping next to a window without a curtain. I to this day cannot explain what happened and why it seemed to happen to us, and cannot explain what I saw in the lake and what Ryan specifically saw. Nothing has ever happened at that cabin since that night, so we're told from my friend's dad who owns it. I personally have never decided to go back to the cabin, which really makes me sad because I had great childhood memories there. Tommy and Kevin both have gone back and been fine, but Ryan refuses to go back, and I'm with him. A lot of people have cabins on the island, so it could have been a prank in the making, so I had been busted when Ryan saw the person at the window, or the person possibly wanting to do something worse. I will never be able to explain what was floating in the lake, but the fact that this incident, along with bare feet and someone looking in at Ryan all night, happened the same night feels like more than a coincidence.
I am an avid hunter. I go every season, and I love it. More often than not, I don't kill any game, but I just love getting out into the woods. I don't know if you're familiar with hunting seasons in Pennsylvania, but during late November, rifle season is in full swing. It was already the second week of the season, and I had yet to bag any deer, so I was eager to get to it, early in the morning. And I did. I normally get up around 5 a.m. and drive to my hunting spot. It's private land that my grandfather owns. Him and I are the only two who hunt on it, and the rest is posted to hunters, and the only others on the land are employed on my grandfather's farm. I had originally planned on calling my grandfather when I woke up and asking him if he wanted to tag along, but the weather that morning was horrendous. Snow was pouring down and the wind was really strong. I love hunting in the snow, but it almost made me decide not to go. So I knew he wouldn't want to either. The roads were really bad, so it took me a bit longer to drive there. Normally the sun would be starting to rise by now. However, it was overcast and snowing. Regardless of the snow, I walked up to my spot. It was directly behind my grandfather's house, over a hill and back about 100 to 150 yards. Almost immediately upon sitting in my spot, I hear things moving all around me. Honestly, I didn't pay much attention. It could be any number of things, but it was still pitch black, and the thought that it was a deer had crossed my mind. But there wasn't much I could do. It's not like I could shoot at it. So I just ignored it and continued to wait. It wasn't much longer that I began hearing something walking just over the ridge to my right. At this point, there's barely enough light for me to see my feet. So even if it was a deer, there was still nothing I could do. However, I could tell it wasn't a deer. I just assumed it was my grandfather, walking to his spot, which is just a short walk from mine. But the lights in his house were off, and if he was hunting up there, I'm sure he'd let me know prior. But even if it wasn't him, it was a hunter. albeit hunting illegally. I still wanted to let him know I was here, so I turned on my flashlight and pointed it in his direction, flashing it several times. Again, even if it was a deer, I couldn't shoot it, so I felt it was better to be safe rather than sorry. Nothing much happened after that. After I flashed my light, the noise stopped, which was really odd. I didn't hear them turn back, so I figured they either sat down right there after seeing my light, which is considered extremely rude, or I didn't hear them walk off. I just assumed it was the latter. An hour or so passes, and finally the first sights of daylight to start shining through. It's still snowing, and the snow is falling in entire snowballs rather than snowflakes, so visibility is pretty limited. But I just grinned and bared it. I love snow, and even if I couldn't see any deer, I still found the weather beautiful. It was around this time that I noticed an odd-looking lump protruding out from the group of trees and shrubs atop the hill that separated me from my granddad's house. Right where I heard movement earlier. It looked like a mound of dirt, however, was sticking out was from the side of a tree, so obviously it wasn't dirt. Naturally, I raised my rifle up to take a closer look. I could tell immediately that I was looking at the side of an older style camouflage coat. It took me a minute, but it finally clicked. That was a person over there. I just thought it was a hunter, so I didn't know what to do about it. I knew he was hunting on our land illegally, and from what I could see, he wasn't wearing anything orange, which is required all hunters during the rifle season. And I could just tell from looking whoever this wasn't my grandfather. I sat there for a minute debating my next move, but decided to call my granddad, at the risk of blowing his hunt if that was him over there. So, without taking my eyes off this guy, I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. To my dismay, he picked up, and I told him what was going on, so he told me he'd make his way up. But I decided on my own to give the guy a whistle to let him know I see him, but he didn't react at all. After a few minutes, I started walking up to this guy. After walking a short distance, I could clearly see the guy, who was sound asleep tucked in between a shrub and a couple of trees. He obviously thought out where to lay down, as I would never be able to see him had his coat not stuck out. And as I thought he had no orange on, I gave him another whistle, much louder, and he woke right up, almost immediately shuffling over to hide his exposed coat. He had a nasty, scruffy beard and a gray hat. Honestly, he looked like a harmless old homeless man, probably in his 50s, but he had perfect view of my granddad's home from his spot. And I have a pretty good idea what he was planning to do once my granddad left the house. Once this guy realized he'd been caught, and saw a mad 6'5" guy carrying a hunting rifle less than 10 yards away, making his way closer, his face went pale. Almost instantly he tried to feed me some bullshit that he'd gotten lost during a drive with a group of other hunters. However, the closest public game land is miles from this spot, so I knew this was a lie. He just kept on going about how he was lost and how he fell asleep. He went as far as to make up a fake name on the spot. I just stood there and listened, making sure he didn't make any fishy movements. I couldn't help but think about what this guy could have done to my grandfather. God knows he had the chance. And that thought pissed me off enough to tell the guy to shut the fuck up. That's about the point where I saw my granddad. My granddad is a tough old bastard, so my first thought was, this idiot's gonna get himself killed. Luckily, nothing happened. After he got there, we practically had to drag this guy down the road, where my granddad called the cops and I called my dad. Technically, this guy hadn't done anything yet, so all we could do was charge him with trespassing and stalking. That was about a month ago, and since then, I haven't heard anything else about him.